Hey there, I'm Mark. Welcome back to my build series on this Prusa MK4S printer. So if you missed the first episode yesterday, I'll link to the playlist up in the corner now so that you can go check that out. But this is what we ended up with. This is just the frame of the printer with nothing else on it just yet. And I think that we don't need this today, so I'm going to set this off to the side. And in today's part of the build, we're going to build the X-axis, and I don't think that we mount it on the frame yet until tomorrow's episode. So I'm going to get this cleared out of the way, and I'm going to go grab the parts that we need for the X-axis assembly. I'm going to get those set up here on the desk, and then we'll get started with this part of the build. All right, so just taking a quick look through the instructions, the assembly guide, which is, as always, right down below my face here on the screen so you can follow along with what I'm looking at as we assemble. Looked through that real quickly, and I believe that all we need for today's work are these 3 bags, which again, come nicely labeled, so they're easy to find out of the kit. So we've got these 2 bags of printed parts for the X-axis and X-carriage, some in black and some in the Prusa orange color, and then 1 bag of hardware. It looks like this thing has our bearings and some other hardware and our belt all in there. So I'm going to be pulling parts out of here as needed as we go along. And then, of course, we need our screws and fasteners and such. And if you weren't following along in the previous episode, what I did with those is I unpacked them all and put them in these little sorting trays so that I have them all in here and labeled, and I can pull those out as we go along as well. So I won't show any footage of me, getting the parts ready. I'll just, show the stuff as I'm putting things together. So that should be everything we need, and the 2 X-axis rods as well, which I've already pulled out of the box of rods that came with the kit. These are the 2 longest in that box. So those will be ready to go off here to the side when we need them. And with that, I'm going to get this cleared out of the way and grab the parts that we need for the first couple of steps here, which it looks like is these orange parts and the hardware that goes into those as we start to screw things together. So I'm going to get those ready to go, and then we'll start assembly. So it looks like up first is mounting the hardware into both of these plastic parts here. And I believe that it's going to be just, basically 2 repetitive tasks. One is, let me get you a closer view here. One is taking these hex nuts and inserting them into these hexagonal shaped holes here. And probably the best way to do that is to get that started in the opening and then come in from the back side with a long enough screw and just tighten this down, which will pull that nut into place. There we go. So it's seated all the way down into that opening, and then we can just remove the screw. So I've got, it looks like 4 places there. All right, and with those in place, they want us to take one of these square nuts and put it into this little slot right here. I'm going to press that down with this Allen key to make sure that it lines up with the opening that's right here. And then this long M3 by 25 screw goes in here. And they don't want us to tighten this all the way down. They just want us to tighten it basically so that it's even with the top of this part right here. I think this will be used to adjust the tension on the motor later on, is what it looks like to me. And then with that in place, we're supposed to insert 2 of these M3 by 16s into this hole up at the top here, and then this one down at the bottom over here. And these just screw into plastic, it looks like. And so I'm going to carefully get these started. So I'm going to tighten this down until it's flush with the opening here, but I'm being careful not to over tighten it because I don't want to damage the plastic. So there we go. And same thing on the other side. All right, now we have a couple more of these square nuts to put in place. This one goes in this little angled hole or gap that's down underneath here. It's actually not as hard to press in place as I was expecting, given the kind of awkward angle there. It was hard to get on camera to show you guys, though. All right, so that lines up with this hole right here. And then we've got one over here on this side as well. And they note in the instructions to be cautious about not pushing this one in too far because the opposite wall here that stops it is fairly thin, so you don't want to break through the plastic. Just get that lined up with that opening there. And that's looking pretty good. On the next page, we grab this piece here, and we have a similar thing to do. So we have two of these hexagonal openings here to put our hex nuts into. All right, so now we have at the top of this part, two more slots for our square nuts to slide in. There and there. I'll go ahead and push them nicely into place. And then, just like we did with this other part, they want us to thread two of these M3x16s directly into the plastic. I assume that both of these screws on this part and on the other part are just here to enhance or enforce rigidity along the path where the bearings are going to be. All right, and now I have two of the M3 square nuts still sitting here on the desk, so I assume that on the next page they will tell us, yes, to put them again in this weird little angled slot here. And then the much easier to access one up here. All right, and so we have these two parts done. And the little casings here for the bearings are next. Now it says in the assembly guide that these bearings come pre-lubricated from the factory, so we do not need to lubricate them. I did notice when I was unpacking all of the tools and everything that they did provide, I've got it right here, a little tube of lubricant. So I guess this is for re-lubricating in the future if you ever need to, but apparently we do not need to use them right now. All right. Everything's ready to go. So our assembly process here is that these little plastic printed parts here have some small sort of rectangular cutouts down here. And I'm supposed to press these little rubber rectangular shapes right down into those openings. Actually, that was easier than I expected and is staying in place nicely. So that's great. Yeah, nice. So those just pop in there and kind of sit there perfectly. And then we're supposed to grab one of these and slide it in this way. There is a little lip on the plastic part here that sticks up. So once we slide this down this way, it will stop right there. And then we're supposed to look from the end, and I'll see if I can get a shot with the camera looking down here for you to see. There are 4 rows of bearings down inside of there, and you want them to make, when you're looking with the bottom flat here, you want those bearings to be in sort of an X pattern. So you want them to be on the diagonals rather than straight up and straight sideways. And so I'm going to rotate this so that that is in the correct orientation, and we should be good to go. So now that we've done that one time, we have to do it a second time for the other piece here. All right, and now we can take this piece and we can slide this in this way, just as far as it will go. And I can see that the bearing presses up against a little bit of a lip here on this side as well. So that went in there very nicely. Then they want us to grab 4 of these M3x30 screws and just put them in these 4 openings here to screw this together. Being careful once we tighten them down to tighten them in a diagonal pattern, right? So I'm going to do like here, here, then here, and here. All right, that looks good to me, and I can still see that the bearings are oriented in that sort of X pattern that they wanted to have us use. So that looks good. And then I believe we do the same thing here for the other piece. All right, so those two pieces now should be ready to go. On to the next one. All right, so I've grabbed the two X-axis rods, which again are the longest ones out of the package. I wiped these down with a paper towel just to make sure that they're nice and perfectly clean. And then we've got the three smaller sized bearings out of the little Ziploc bag that came with all the parts. And what they want us to do is actually look at these. Again, we're looking to make sure that we have sort of an X pattern with the bearing that are lined up inside of here. And once we see that, they want us to take a marker and mark the outside of the bearing here on the top. So we can see this is the line that's kind of in between the two rows of bearings there, so that if this is straight up or straight down, we'll have that same X sort of orientation to the bearings. I'm going to do that here on all three of these, because I think what's going to happen is we're going to end up with these in an orientation such that we won't be able to see on the inside that they're lined up correctly. And so they want us to have this marking here so that we have a guide to know how to orient those once we get them inside of the carriage piece here. All right, and with that all prepared, they want us to grab this piece here, orient it this way. Let me move these out of the way. And then we're going to grab these two rods and being very careful to keep them straight so that we don't twist or break any parts. We're going to slide those in, and there is a tiny little window here. See if I can get you a close-up of it, where you can see that the rod has come all the way into the part as far as it will go. So we'll do the same thing here with the other one. Like that, and we'll check again here to see that we see it in that little opening. And that looks good. Now we're supposed to, again, being careful of the orientation, so we want this little extra sort of chunky part of this piece toward the top away from me. And once we do that, we can slide a bearing onto this rod and then two onto this other rod. Just like that. They are moving nicely, which is awesome. All right, and then we can grab this piece, this assembly, and we want it oriented in this direction, and then we're going to slide it onto these two rods. Again, trying to keep everything straight and parallel. And again, on the back side, we should have a couple of little openings that I can look through to make sure that I can see that these rods have slid all the way into place. So that looks good. And we'll set this off to the side and work on these parts next. All right, so it's time for the X carriage, and it looks like we're going to do our standard thing we do now with all of these parts, which is to begin by inserting some of these square nuts into some little slots. This one here was a little bit difficult to get lined up just because there's this plastic wall behind it. And so it was hard to access with the tool. But there we are. And I have no more square nuts on my desk, so that should be all of them. And then we've got a couple of hex nuts. One goes here, and one goes right there. All right, now we're supposed to take one of these M3x10s and put it in here. And it comes out on this side over here. And we're supposed to grab one of these little hexagonal shaped standoffs. Screw that on there. And there is a hexagonal like indentation in the part here that this sits in snugly. And then we tighten this down from the back side. Just like so. Then we have two more of those to do, one here and one here. Right, so all those are oriented well. They're nice and tight. They all look like they're the same height as well when I look at them from the side. So I think we're good to go there. On the next page, they want us to grab this other little casing part that's going to hold the bearings from the other side. Two more of our little rubber pads that we used on the other bearing pieces over there. And again, there are little rectangular indentations in this printed part that these just kind of press down into. Make sure I get the fit just right. All right, so that's looking good. And now we need this piece again. So they want us to orient it this way. So with the housing that's going to hold the motor over here to my right-hand side, and the two bearings at the bottom, the one bearing at the top. Let me get you a wider angle view here so you can see. Just like that. Then we are going to grab this piece here. And we want to orient it this way. And we'll just move this bearing out of the way for the moment. We don't need this one yet. We just need these two bottom ones. And we're supposed to set them on here like so. And now is where those markings that we put on the casings of the bearings will come in handy, because I'm going to turn this until I see that marking facing me. I'm not sure if the camera picks this up. I didn't use a black Sharpie, I used a gold one because that's just what I had in my drawer here. So you may not be able to see that, but the markings are here and here, facing downward, as downward from the point of view of how the x-axis is going to go, straight at me as I look at this from the bottom. Right, and now we're supposed to put this casing piece on here, like this. And then we're supposed to use these 4 M3x10 screws to tighten this down. It also notes in the assembly guide that we're not supposed to fully tighten these screws just yet. All right, so again, these are now snug, but not super tight yet. And we need to go ahead and move on to getting the motor in place. So I'm gonna go grab that. All right, so here is our X motor. Again, same as with the Y motor, it's actually labeled right on here. It says X-axis on the back of the motor. And then it's got a little tag with an X at the end of the wire here where we will plug it in. I believe that the X and Y motors are the same. They have a different length of wire. And so that's the only reason that they've labeled them differently. So what we need to do here is grab an M3x10, which is this smaller of these screws, and they want us to put it into this opening down here, but it doesn't actually screw into anything. This little tensioning screw that we put in earlier is going to just press on it, I think, to push it up against the motor to make the motor move back and forth as needed. So we will work with that later on, I imagine. But for now, they want us to put that in there and then flip this upside down. I've got my finger on that screw head to make sure that it doesn't fall out as we move things around here. And then we're supposed to put the motor this way and use our 3 M3x18 screws here to screw down into the holes to mount the motor in place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get these 3 started. There we go. And then I'm going to flip this over again real quick just to make sure that that little screw that we put in place there has not fallen out and it looks good. So I did not mention either, but the orientation of the wire, it says in the assembly guide, should be downward toward me as I'm looking at this assembly. And we want to loosely tighten these things with the motor pressed all the way to my right. All right, and now we can work on the pulley itself. So I've got to turn this motor shaft so that the flat side is facing this opening outward toward me here. And then we put on our pulley, and they want this oriented so the teeth are down toward the motor. I'm going to slide this on this way. And just as we did with the Y-axis motor, I'll see if I can get you a good view of this. We're going to tighten this down just enough so that it kind of bites on the flat side there, but it can still move up and down a bit. Then we're going to use a second Allen wrench to align the top of this pulley with, just if we place this across the plastic part here, this should align right up there. So I'm going to hold this down with my finger. I'm going to press this up with my thumb, and then I'm going to use my other hand here to tighten this down. That looks good, and then I can rotate this and find the other grub screw and tighten it down as well. All right, and then just double checking again by placing an Allen wrench across the top of here to make sure that everything is good. All right, that looks good. It's aligned correctly. And now we need to prepare our belt and our idler. And this pin here is what's used to hold that in place. So what we want to do is place the belt around the idler, hold it in place like this. And then from this side, I'm just going to move the X carriage out of the way for a minute. We're going to slide into this opening right here. And we're going to use our pin here to press down through and grab that idler. They want us to push this all the way down and then pull it this way. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but here we go. I'll try to get you a close-up. See, the end of the pin is there. As I pull it this way, it disappears. It actually goes into a slot there that will hold it in place. So that's how you know that the pin is set correctly. And now we want to go ahead and grab this, pull it over this way, and slot this in to this opening right here in our X carriage. So there are little teeth in this printed part that the belt will grab into. We can use just an Allen key here to press this down into place. The other end, we want to feed through this opening here. It comes out the other side. Being careful, of course, not to twist it. There we go. And now we're going to run this through here. And let me flip this over maybe so you can see from the other side. Can you see better from the other side? Maybe. There we go. So this comes out here. Then we're going to go around our motor pulley and back this way, right? So that is sitting nice and snug there on our motor. And then we can pull this way. And not a huge amount of tension, but a decent amount of tension on this, and then press it down into the teeth here on this side. Yeah, and that's a pretty decent amount of tension that I'm feeling there, so that's pretty good. All right, and so now we take our final bearing here, and it's important that the little mark that I made is facing up toward us, and then we just rotate this X carriage part out of the way. I lost the mark, there it is. And go ahead and set that in there like so. Now, they want us to slide this back and forth, make sure we have smooth motion, which we do. And now we can finally tighten these 4 screws at the bottom here that we're holding this bearing holder in place. So they want to do, looking at it from sort of the bottom here, actually the picture is this way. They want us to tighten this upper left one first, then this lower right one, then the upper right one, and then the lower left. All right, and that looks good. And then we can check again to make sure that this is sliding well. Which it definitely is. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that it's very easy for this bearing here, which is not captured by anything yet, to rotate a little. So this mark that we have on here is going to be important so that later on when we go and actually put the piece on here that holds this in place, that we make sure that the orientation of this bearing stays the correct way. But other than that, this is looking to be complete and ready to go. Yeah, and according to this page of the instructions, it's done. They want me to eat 5 gummy bears. My fingers are a bit greasy, actually, from the grease from the bearings getting on the rods a bit here and then getting on my fingers as I've been assembling things. So I don't want to eat the gummy bears with greasy fingers. But just to prove, I did eat 5 or whatever it was at the end of step 1. I took them out of the bag that they came in and put them in this Ziploc because I know that this build process is going to take several days and I didn't want them to like dry out having opened the bag. So I will now get 5 of these out. There we go. And I will look at the next page of the instructions with you to note that the next step will be the Z-axis, and then we can get this X-axis mounted onto our frame that we built last time. But that will be in tomorrow's episode. And so, yeah, these are pretty good. So I'll say goodbye for now, and I hope you have a good day. I'm going to finish eating these things, get this episode edited and uploaded for you guys, and tomorrow we'll be back and we'll work on the Z-axis assembly. So I hope to see you then. Have a good one. See ya. These are good.